When Dr. Maya Washington walked into Metropolitan Hospital's cardiac unit that night, she had no idea she was about to face the fight of her career. A critical patient was dying on the operating table, the lead surgeon was frozen with panic, and every second that passed brought them closer to losing a life. Maya knew exactly how to save the patient. She'd performed this exact procedure dozens of times before. But when she stepped up to help, the hospital administrator blocked her path and said the words that would change everything. "We can't let someone like you handle this kind of surgery." He was about to discover that the woman he was dismissing was the youngest cardiac surgery professor in Johns Hopkins history. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the cardiac intensive care unit as Dr. Maya Washington completed her evening rounds. At 28, she moved through the hospital corridors with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place through years of relentless dedication. Her white coat bore the subtle insignia of Johns Hopkins Medical Center, where she served as an attending cardiac surgeon, but tonight she was working a consulting shift at Metropolitan Hospital across town. Maya had always been drawn to cardiac surgery, the precision, the high stakes, the need for absolute competence. The heart was the ultimate challenge, an organ that demanded perfection from its surgeons. There was no room for error, no opportunity for uncertainty. At an age when most doctors were still completing their fellowships, Maya had already performed over 200 successful cardiac procedures and published research that was reshaping how pediatric heart surgery was taught across the country. Her path to this moment hadn't been easy. Growing up in a working-class family in North Carolina, Maya had faced skepticism at every level of her education. Medical school had been particularly challenging. She was often the only black student in her classes, sometimes the only woman. Professors occasionally called on her to provide diversity perspectives on medical issues, as if her race gave her special insight into diseases that affected all populations. But it was during her surgery rotations that Maya had truly found her calling. In the operating room, stripped of social pretense and focused on the immediate reality of life and death, she discovered that her hands were steady, her mind clear, and her instincts sharp. Surgery suited her personality, the precision, the high stakes, the need for absolute competence. Tonight was supposed to be routine. She'd been called in to consult on a 60-year-old man with coronary artery disease, a straightforward procedure that the local surgical team should have been able to handle without difficulty. But as Maya reviewed the patient's charts in the quiet of the cardiac unit, an urgent alarm began blaring from the pediatric wing. Code Blue, Pediatric Emergency Room. Maya's head snapped up from the medical file. A code blue meant cardiac arrest. Someone's heart had stopped beating. In pediatric cases, every second was even more critical than with adults. Children's bodies were more resilient in some ways, but their smaller hearts were also more fragile, less forgiving of extended oxygen deprivation. She stood quickly, her instincts overriding protocol. Even though pediatric emergencies weren't technically her responsibility during this consulting shift, Maya had never been able to ignore a cardiac crisis, especially when a child's life was at stake. She'd completed specialized training in pediatric cardiac surgery during her fellowship, and children's cases had always been her passion. The pediatric emergency room was in chaos when Maya arrived. Nurses rushed back and forth with equipment, their faces tight with controlled panic. In the center of it all, on a hospital bed that looked far too large for his small frame, lay an 8-year-old boy. His skin had taken on the grayish pallor that Maya recognized immediately. Severe cardiac distress. "What's his status?" Maya asked a nearby nurse, automatically falling into the authoritative tone that came naturally in crisis situations. The nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair, looked up from the monitors with relief. 8-year-old Marcus Thompson, admitted an hour ago with chest pains and shortness of breath. His heart rate spiked to 180, then suddenly dropped to 40. "We've got him on oxygen, but his pressure is dropping fast." Maya moved closer to examine the boy. Marcus was unconscious, his breathing shallow and labored despite the oxygen mask covering his small face. The cardiac monitor showed an irregular rhythm that Maya recognized immediately, a rare but serious condition called supraventricular tachycardia, with heart block, complicated by what appeared to be an underlying congenital defect. This was exactly the kind of case she'd specialized in during her fellowship at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. The condition required immediate surgical intervention to correct the electrical pathways in the heart, followed by repair of what looked like a small ventricular septal defect. It was complex, but entirely manageable with the right expertise. "Where's the attending physician?" Maya asked, her mind already racing through treatment options. "Dr. Peterson is on his way, but he's stuck in surgery. The pediatric cardiologist is at another hospital doing an emergency case. We've called everyone, but—" The nurse's voice trailed off, her meaning clear. They were running out of time and options. Maya studied the monitors more carefully. Marcus's condition was deteriorating rapidly. And it wasn't hopeless. Not if they acted immediately. She'd seen this exact presentation 3 times during her fellowship. Each time, quick surgical intervention had saved the patient's life. But delay meant death. "I can help," Maya said quietly to the nurse. "I'm a cardiac surgeon from Johns Hopkins. I've performed this procedure before." The nurse's eyes widened with hope. "Thank God. Let me get the surgical team prepped and—" "What exactly is going on here?" The sharp voice cut through the emergency room noise like a blade. Maya turned to see a tall man in his 50s approaching, his expensive suit and polished shoes marking him as hospital administration rather than medical staff. His name tag read Richard Hawthorne, Chief Administrative Officer. Maya felt her heart sink slightly. Hospital administrators during medical emergencies were rarely helpful and often created unnecessary obstacles when every second counted. "This child is in cardiac distress," Maya explained calmly, maintaining her professional composure. "He needs immediate surgical intervention to correct supraventricular tachycardia with heart block, complicated by what appears to be a ventricular septal defect." Hawthorne held up his hand dismissively, his eyes scanning Maya from head to toe with undisguised skepticism. He took in her youth, her gender, and most obviously her skin color, and Maya could see the exact moment when his prejudices overrode any concern for the patient. "And you are?" he asked, his tone carrying the kind of condescension that Maya had encountered too many times throughout her career. "Dr. Maya Washington, cardiac surgery attending from Johns Hopkins Medical Center. I'm consulting here tonight, and I have the expertise to save this child's life." Hawthorne's expression didn't change, his skepticism, if anything, becoming more pronounced. "Johns Hopkins, you say? What department exactly?" Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with these encounters, but she kept her voice steady. "Cardiac surgery. I specialize in pediatric cases, and this child has a condition I've successfully treated multiple times. Every minute we delay decreases his chances of survival." But Hawthorne was already shaking his head, his mind apparently made up before Maya had finished speaking. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, Dr. Washington, but we can't let someone like you handle this kind of surgery. This is a complex pediatric cardiac case, not something for a resident or fellow to practice on." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. "Someone like you." The phrase carried the weight of every assumption, every prejudice, every time she'd been underestimated or dismissed throughout her career based not on her abilities, but on her appearance. But this wasn't about her feelings. A child was dying on the table just feet away from them. "Miss Hawthorne," she said, fighting to keep her voice level despite the anger building in her chest, "I'm not a resident or fellow. I'm a board-certified cardiac surgeon with specialized pediatric training. This child will die if we don't act now." "Dr. Peterson will be here soon," Hawthorne replied dismissively, waving his hand as if swatting away an annoying insect. "He's been practicing medicine longer than you've been alive. I'm sure he can handle whatever this situation requires." Maya glanced desperately at the monitors. Marcus's heart rate was becoming more erratic, his blood pressure continuing to drop. The oxygen saturation numbers were falling steadily. In her professional estimation, they had perhaps 10 minutes before the damage became irreversible, before this bright 8-year-old boy became another tragic statistic. "Peterson is a general practitioner," Maya said urgently, her professional calm beginning to crack under the pressure of watching a child die while bureaucracy stood in the way. This requires specialized cardiac surgery expertise. I have that expertise. Please don't let this child die because of your assumptions about my qualifications. But Hawthorne had already turned away, speaking in low tones to one of the nurses about preparing for Dr. Peterson's arrival whenever he might finally get there. Maya stood frozen for a moment, watching Marcus's vital signs deteriorate on the monitor, feeling the familiar frustration of being dismissed not for her abilities, but for characteristics she couldn't control. The nurse who had first spoken with Maya approached quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Doctor, I don't care what he says. That boy is dying, and if you can help him. Maya met her eyes and saw the same desperate hope she felt. The nurse understood what Hawthorne apparently couldn't. That administrative hierarchy meant nothing when a child's life was slipping away. Medical ethics were clear about situations like this. When a patient's life was at stake, the duty to help superseded bureaucratic protocol. But Maya also knew the consequences of acting against Hawthorne's direct orders. It could end her consulting arrangement with the hospital, damage her reputation, potentially even result in legal action. Her career, which she'd worked so hard to build despite constant obstacles, could be destroyed. She looked at Marcus again, at his small chest rising and falling with increasing difficulty, at the monitors showing his body's systems slowly shutting down, and the decision made its. Her career meant nothing if she stood by and watched a child die when she had the skills to save him. Prep the OR, she said quietly to the nurse, and get me whoever you can for surgical assistance. The nurse nodded immediately and began moving with practiced efficiency, gathering equipment and coordinating with the available surgical staff. Maya approached Marcus's bedside and placed her hand gently on his forehead. His skin was cool and clammy, but she could feel the faint flutter of a pulse in his temple. You're going to be okay, she whispered, though he couldn't hear her. I'm going to fix your heart. 20 minutes later, Maya was in the operating room, working with the focused precision that had made her reputation at Johns Hopkins. She'd successfully identified the abnormal electrical pathway that was causing Marcus's life-threatening arrhythmia, and had used radiofrequency ablation to eliminate it. His heart rhythm had already stabilized on the monitor. Now she was working on the second part of the procedure, repairing the small hole between Marcus's ventricles. This required even greater precision. As she worked directly on the wall between the heart's lower chamber, she selected a specialized patch that would integrate with Marcus's own heart tissue as he grew. Beautiful work, commented Dr. Sarah Kim, a second-year cardiology resident who had volunteered to assist despite not being officially assigned to the case. I've never seen an ablation performed with that level of precision. Maya smiled behind her surgical mask. This was why she loved teaching, sharing knowledge with the next generation of doctors, passing on skills that could save lives. Practice and patience, she said, her voice taking on the teaching tone she used with residents at Johns Hopkins. Every heart is different, but the principles remain the same. The repair of the septal defect took another 40 minutes, with Maya carefully suturing the patch into place and ensuring that all of Marcus's cardiac structures remained perfectly aligned. When she was finished, she stepped back and watched the monitors with quiet satisfaction. Marcus's heart was beating strongly and regularly. His blood pressure had stabilized, and his oxygen saturation was returning to normal levels. That's it, she announced to the surgical team. Let's close him up. But even as Maya began the process of closing Marcus's chest, she knew that her real challenge was just beginning. She'd saved the child's life, but she'd done so in direct defiance of Hawthorne's orders. The consequences for her career could be severe, but she'd made her choice and would stand by it. The operating room doors burst open just as Maya was applying the final surgical dressing to Marcus's chest. Richard Hawthorne strode in, his face red with anger, followed by Dr. Sin, the attending physician who had finally arrived from his other surgery. What the hell is going on here? Hawthorne demanded, his voice echoing angrily in the small operating room. I specifically told you not to operate on this patient. Maya removed her surgical mask slowly and met his furious gaze with calm professionalism. The patient was dying, Mr. Hawthorne. I had the expertise to save him, so I did. That's what doctors do. You had no authority to perform surgery in this hospital. Hawthorne's voice rose to nearly a shout, his face growing even redder. This is a violation of protocol, a breach of professional conduct, and potentially criminal negligence. Peterson, a gray-haired man in his 60s who carried himself with the dignity of 3 decades in medicine, moved quickly to examine Marcus's monitors and surgical site. His expression changed from skepticism to amazement as he took in the boy's stable vital signs and the evidence of expert surgical technique. "Richard," he said quietly, his voice cutting through Hawthorne's angry tirade, "this child was dying when I left for my emergency surgery. His condition was deteriorating so rapidly that I wasn't sure we could save him even if I'd been able to operate immediately." "That's not the point," Hawthorne snapped, his anger seemingly undiminished by the successful outcome. "She had no business. She saved his life," Peterson interrupted firmly, his voice carrying the authority of decades of medical experience. "This is some of the finest cardiac surgery I've ever seen. The precision of the ablation, the technique used for the septal defect repair. This is work that would be impressive coming from the chief of cardiac surgery at any major medical center." Maya appreciated Peterson's support, but she could see that Hawthorne wasn't swayed by medical expertise or successful outcomes. His anger seemed to stem from something deeper than protocol violations, something more personal and ugly. "Hawthorne," she said calmly, drawing on every ounce of professional training to keep her voice steady, "I understand your concerns about hospital procedure, but this child would have died if I hadn't operated. Surely saving a life takes precedence over administrative protocol." "Don't lecture me about hospital administration," Hawthorne fired back, pointing an accusatory finger at Maya. "I don't know how they do things at wherever you claim to be from, but in this hospital, we follow proper procedures. We don't let unqualified personnel perform surgery on critically ill patients." The accusation of being unqualified hit Maya like a slap across the face. She'd spent years proving herself, earning degrees, passing the most rigorous examinations in medicine, completing one of the most competitive surgical residencies in the country. Yet here she stood, being called unqualified by a man whose medical knowledge likely didn't extend beyond basic first aid. But before Maya could respond, Dr. Kim stepped forward, holding her tablet with Maya's professional profile displayed on the screen. "Miss Hawthorne," she said firmly, "I think you need see this." She held up the screen which showed Maya's photograph and credentials from the Johns Hopkins Medical Center website. Dr. Maya Washington, Associate Professor of Cardiac Surgery, Johns Hopkins Medical Center. Winner of the American College of Cardiology's Young Investigator Award. Author of 23 peer-reviewed publications on pediatric cardiac surgery. Developer of the Washington technique for minimally invasive ventricular septal defect repair. The room fell completely silent as the implications sank in. Maya watched Hawthorne's face as he processed the information, saw the exact moment when he realized the magnitude of his mistake and the depth of his prejudice. "The Washington technique," Peterson said with obvious amazement, turning to look at Maya with new respect. "It's named after you. I've read about that procedure in the journals. It's revolutionizing pediatric cardiac surgery. We've been trying to get someone trained in that technique to come give a seminar here." Maya nodded, feeling a mixture of vindication and exhaustion. "I developed it during my fellowship. It allows for much smaller incisions and significantly faster recovery times in pediatric patients." Dr. Kim continued reading from the tablet, her voice growing stronger with each credential. Dr. Washington became the youngest attending cardiac surgeon in Johns Hopkins history at age 26. She has performed over 200 successful cardiac procedures with a surgical mortality rate of less than 1%, well below the national average for cardiac surgery. Hawthorne's face had gone completely pale, the angry red flush replaced by the sickly pallor of a man confronting his own profound error in judgment. The woman he'd dismissed as unqualified was not only supremely qualified, but was actually one of the most accomplished cardiac surgeons in the country. His prejudice had nearly cost a child his life, and now his mistake was being laid bare in front of the entire surgical staff. "Dr. Washington," he said quietly, his earlier bluster completely gone. "I owe you a profound apology. I made assumptions that were completely inappropriate and potentially deadly." Maya looked at him steadily, seeing not just embarrassment, but the beginning of genuine recognition of what he'd done. "Your assumptions nearly killed this child, Mr. Hawthorne. If I had listened to you, if I had accepted your judgment of my qualifications, Marcus would be dead right now. I understand that, and I take full responsibility for my error in judgment," Hawthorne said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is there anything I can do to make this right?" Maya considered the question carefully. She could demand his resignation, file a complaint with the hospital board, seek legal action for the discrimination she'd faced. But none of those actions would undo the harm that had been done or prevent similar incidents in the future. "What you can do," she said finally, "is ensure that this never happens again. Not to me, not to any other qualified physician who doesn't fit your preconceived notions of what a doctor should look like." Hawthorne nodded solemnly. "You have my word, Dr. Washington, and I want you to know that I will be recommending to the board that we establish a formal consulting relationship with you. This hospital needs access to your level of expertise." As the group began to disperse, Dr. Peterson approached Maya privately. "Washington, I want to add my own apology to Richard's. I should have been here sooner, and I should have stood up to him more forcefully when I arrived." "You couldn't have known the situation," Maya replied graciously. "And honestly, even if you'd been here from the beginning, this case required specialized expertise that most general practitioners wouldn't have." 2 hours later, Maya was completing her post-operative notes when the same nurse who had first helped her brought an update on Marcus. "He's awake and stable," the nurse reported with a broad smile. "His parents are with him now, and he's asking for ice cream." Maya smiled genuinely for the first time that night. A child asking for ice cream after cardiac surgery was always an excellent sign. It meant his body was recovering well, his appetite was returning to normal, and his spirit was intact. "Any complications?" she asked, though the monitors had shown nothing but positive signs. "None at all. His heart rhythm is perfect, his incisions are healing beautifully, and his oxygen saturation is completely normal. It's like he never had a heart problem at all." That was the ultimate goal of pediatric cardiac surgery. Not just to fix the immediate problem, but to restore the child to a completely normal life. Marcus would grow up, play sports, fall in love, have children of his own, all because of the surgery performed tonight. Maya visited Marcus briefly before leaving the hospital. He was sitting up in his hospital bed when she entered his room, his parents flanking him on either side. He was a beautiful child with bright, curious eyes and an infectious smile that lit up his entire face. His parents, clearly exhausted but profoundly relieved, stood as she approached. "Are you the doctor who fixed my heart?" Marcus asked with the direct curiosity that only children possessed. "I am," Maya replied, approaching his bedside with a gentle smile. "How are you feeling, Marcus?" "Better. My chest hurts a little, but the nurse said that's normal." She said, "You did a really hard operation to make my heart work better." "That's right. Your heart had a small problem with its electrical system and a tiny hole, but now both are fixed. You should be able to do everything other kids your age do. Run, play sports, whatever makes you happy." Marcus's parents stepped forward, his mother with tears of gratitude in her eyes. "Dr. Washington," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "we can never thank you enough. When we brought Marcus to the emergency room tonight, we thought we might lose him. The nurses told us what happened," Marcus's father added, his voice filled with admiration and gratitude. "How you fought to operate on him when others said no. You literally saved our son's life." As Maya prepared to leave, Marcus called out to her one final time. "Dr. Washington, when I grow up, I want to be a doctor like you so I can help kids too." Maya paused at the door, deeply touched by the boy's innocent words. "That would be wonderful, Marcus. The world always needs more doctors who care about helping others." Walking through the hospital corridors toward the exit, Maya reflected on the extraordinary events of the night. She'd saved a child's life, confronted institutional prejudice, and hopefully opened doors for better patient care in the future. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Elizabeth Chen. her mentor at Johns Hopkins, heard about your heroics at Metropolitan tonight. The medical community is smaller than people think. Word travels fast. Incredibly proud of you for putting the patient first. As always, call me tomorrow morning. I think this might lead to some very interesting opportunities. Maya smiled as she read the message. Chen had always been her strongest advocate, and if she thought tonight's events might lead to new opportunities, Maya was curious to hear what she had in mind. As she drove home through the quiet streets, Maya thought about Marcus, already talking about becoming a doctor himself. Maybe by the time he was ready to enter medicine, the profession would be more welcoming to people who didn't fit traditional expectations. But even if it wasn't, Maya would continue doing what she'd always done, letting her work speak for itself, saving lives regardless of the obstacles, and proving that competence and compassion mattered infinitely more than appearances or assumptions. The night had started with prejudice and nearly ended in tragedy, but it had concluded with a saved life, hard-won respect, and the possibility of changing an institution for the better. For Dr. Maya Washington, that made all the challenges and struggles worthwhile.